I know we've got some time challenges for today, so we will have, I'll just kind of give you guys a check on terms of lunch, because I know we have to finish another item that we have not finished yet. So we will just jump into the public comment. I have a few here. So Jane Vosper. And just, I think Jane, you're given just direction for time, right?
Yes,
We've-
yes.
We really welcome
Like
the
4.5
public comment.
minutes is what I
Yeah.
have here. Anyway, I want to start by saying today, CalSTRS, you and I celebrate our first anniversary. Last June, I made my first public comment on behalf of Fossil-Free California. On reflection, our relationship has been very cordial, and we can thank our mediator, Gretchen Ziegler, for keeping our communications open. However, the biggest issue that drives us apart, as in many relationships, is your handling of our money. For the life of me and for the sake of our children, we are perplexed and very dismayed that you continue to invest our retirement funds in the fossil fuel industry. Without being patronizing, we truly believe that you have not fully understood the severity of the threat of global warming, not only to our retirement portfolio, but to our very existence. Why else have you not already invoked your divestment policy and begun divesting holdings from the fossil fuel industry? Here is the picture. We must not exceed increasing the global temperature by more than 2 degrees Celsius. We are currently on course to raising the global temperature by 4 degrees Celsius. What does a 4-degree increase look like? It would guarantee the total melting of the Greenland ice sheet and most likely the Western Antarctic ice sheet, raising sea levels by a combined 32 or more feet. The timescales are uncertain, but not the outcome. 2/3 of the world's major cities, 2/3 of the world's major cities, and all of southern Bangladesh and Florida would end up underwater. Nor is there any guarantee that temperatures would level off at 4 degrees. At this level, further powerful feedbacks and tipping points could lead temperatures to keep rising even further, to 6 and then 8 degrees. What does this mean? In a nutshell, one of the world's most influential climate scientists said that the difference between 2 and 4 degrees that we're already on track for is human civilization. So when will we reach a 4 degrees Celsius increase? Some researchers estimate by 2060 to 2070. However, a recent, more pessimistic paper argues that we could reach 4 degrees by mid-century. That's 4 degrees. We shouldn't even go above 2 degrees. And 8 degrees by the end of the century. I am not an alarmist by nature, but these figures are truly frightful. According to George Marshall, who wrote the book, Don't Even Think About It, Why Our Brains Are Wired to Ignore Climate Change, humans respond in one of 3 ways to really bad news. We will accept the information, we will avoid the information, or we will deny the information. And we've all responded with one of those right now. We've all done one of those things instantly. The irony is that these responses have boded us well over the centuries. However, with only one of these responses will be of value with regard to dealing with climate change. Not only do we have to accept the information, but we also have to collectively act on it. As I look around this room, I see intelligent, loving parents and grandparents who care about the environment and who would give up their lives to protect their children and grandchildren from a fatal accident or drowning or being mauled by an animal. And yet, you hesitate to take the necessary action to protect your children from the looming catastrophe that is guaranteed if we do not take bold action to drastically reduce greenhouse gas emissions. For the sake of our collective children, and because fossil fuel companies violate one of CalSTR's 21 risk factors, the environmental risk factor, we CalSTR's teachers urge you, Mr. Ailman, to ask your investment committee to at least invoke the CalSTRS divestment policy to divest CalSTRS holding from all fossil fuels. As I look ahead to our second year together, I trust that we will not become gridlocked in inaction. Time is not on our side. Thank you very much.
Carmen Osorio with Fossil Free California.
Thank you so much for staying to listen to my friends and myself. I have the privilege of being an educator, and through my years of teaching, I have seen a lot of Latinos accomplish the dreams that their parents made huge sacrifices for. Many of my former students are now fulfilling their dreams and are productive force in this country. Most have proven through the history of their own country and by coming here to the United States of America that they can not only adapt in a new culture, but also thrive. In the past, I have been able to inspire my students to dream of a future that will be worth it of their aspirations and hard work. However, they, along with all of my students, face a future which will make their ability to thrive and adapt impossible if we continue on the path we are on. The powers that be, including the decision makers in this room, have to take bold actions to address the very serious threat of climate change. How do I continue to remain positive and instill hope in my students when scientists tell us that these young people who sit so hopefully in my classroom will have to deal with all the climate catastrophes brought on by global warming? And these catastrophic events are going to happen much sooner than most of us want to acknowledge. How can we as teachers honestly gain our students' trust when we tell them that if they work hard, they will have wonderful options for their future? Instead, they will be dealing with the effects of weather extremes, record-breaking wildfires, droughts, and wilter crops, torrential storms, increases in health issues like asthma and heat strokes. And what breaks my heart is knowing that my pension funds, CalSTRS, continues to invest billions of dollars in the fossil fuel companies that knowingly continue to cause the destruction of all life in this miraculous planet. I sit on my porch and wonder what happened to the phrase, "It takes a village to raise our children." The village elders looking out for the well-being of all the children in the village. Well, we are the elders of the village, but we no longer have the power to make the necessary changes to protect our children. Today, the wealthy corporations have all the power. As a Latina, I know the feelings of powerlessness only too well. I also know that research from Stanford University tells me that extreme heat projections for the US in 2030 show that the West and Southwest are going to get really, really hot. These regions are going to have the largest concentrations of people of color in the country and Latinos who will be the fastest growing part of that population. Once again, the poor and people of color will be the first to suffer the consequences of extreme heat. In the past, investors saw the benefits of investing in the Industrial Revolution that allowed to make dramatic changes for the good of the people throughout the 20th century. Unfortunately, we now realize that we have paid an unacceptable price for the Industrial Revolution carbon emission. I am proud that a fellow Latino senator, Dio Leon, had authored the State Bill 185 for the divestiture of coal. However, his bill needs to go further and include the divestiture of all fossil fuels. 86% of Latino poll strongly supported President Obama taking action to reduce pollution that causes climate change. 92% want to increase the use of renewable energy, which they view as a huge opportunity for job creation. We are not the radicals. The fossil fuel companies who are changing the chemical composition of our atmosphere are the radicals. I ask you today, for the sake of all the students, to stop supporting the industry that is intent on burning all of its fuel, no matter that it will destroy life in the planet. We as teachers are doing our part in our classrooms. We are inspiring our children. Please start your divestment process now. Gracias.
Thank you. Bill Vosper?
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for allowing me to speak. I'm Bill Vosper from Santa Rosa. I'm a retired teacher. And we've been coming here for several months, and we've been hearing repeatedly officials from CalSTRS saying to us that the chosen policy of CalSTRS is to engage with fossil fuel companies and not divest. And my question today, especially in the light of Mr. Steyer's comments, is one, why would CalSTRS continue to that preferred strategy of engagement rather than divestment? Engagement has very little track record of success. If it were a business plan submitted to venture capitalists, it would be turned down flat. Within the past month for the Exxon shareholder meeting in Dallas, that only offers further proof of the folly of trying to engage with fossil fuel companies. A shareholder resolution from a Milwaukee Roman Catholic organization tried to get Exxon to set caps for greenhouse gases, and they failed with less than 10% of the vote. It's the 9th year in a row that such policy of engagement has been rejected by Exxon. Exxon also rejected shareholder father Michael Crosby's attempts to get a climate expert on a seat on the board. This motion gained 20% of the vote. Beth Pierce, the Vermont State Treasurer, also offered a resolution for caps on greenhouse gases. That also failed with around 10% of the vote. And Exxon CEO Rex Tillerson says that sea level rises, quote, may or may not be induced by climate change, among other things. He's thus confirming his position as a climate change denier and a part of that group that are called the merchants of doubt, the people who are spreading misinformation about the effects of climate change. Beavis Longstreth, former commissioner of the SEC, has said that engagement with fossil fuels companies is, quote, a fool's errand, and it would be like, quote, convincing Philip Morris to stop making cigarettes or asking Johnny Walker to abandon his distilleries, quote. In February, we heard from the former Vice President Al Gore in this room say that using engagement to get fossil fuel companies to change core business practices was entirely unsuccessful. They might make positive noises, but in the end, they would do very little. And your own experience with the failed attempts to engage with gun companies in your portfolio should be a lesson and a warning about how engagement does not work. Again, we ask, given this evidence, why would CalSTRS preferred option be to continue to try to engage fossil fuel companies? Recently, AXA, the global insurance and wealth management company, which is number 16 on Forbes' list, divested from coal. Henri de Castries, the CEO, said, climate change is an extremely large risk. It's our responsibility as long-term institutional investors to consider carbon a risk. He also said, quote, divesting contributes to de-risking our portfolio. British bank HSBC, which is 36 on Forbes' list, is the 8th largest bank in the world, said in a recent analysis that risk of stranded assets have grown and will continue to do so. They said it's an immature risk and will accelerate in the future. HSBC also cited a study by the University College of London showing that if we're to stay under the 2-degree Celsius increase, which some people have predicted will happen in 2028, sorry. Some people said as early as 2032, latest 2032. And that 2-degree increase seems to be the tipping point from which it's very difficult to go back. Well, if we're to stay under 2 degrees Celsius, the University College of London said 35% of all oil reserves have to stay in the ground, 52% of gas reserves, and 88% of coal reserves. What happens to the value of the $6 billion that CalSTRS has invested in fossil fuels when these assets then become stranded? Since you prefer engagement, our question has to be, have you invoked your engagement policy with fossil fuels? If you haven't done so, when will you, and what will it take for you to do so? When you engage them, what will your requests be? Will it be to place a renewable energy expert on the board of trustees, to place a cap on greenhouse gas, to cease CapEx for explorations, maybe in the Arctic, to expand renewable operations so that they become a 21st century energy company? Will you ask Exxon to cease drilling, shipping, and selling oil? How will you word that request so that CEOs like Exxon's Rex Tillerson will hear and listen to that request? What will your benchmarks be in time frame so that when you start your divestment, how will you know that it's working? And if it's not, when will you reject it and move to something else like divestment? Will engagement begin in sufficient time so we can meet that 2028 deadline for lowering emissions so we can keep the planet from heating to that all-important 2 degrees, the tipping point after which there may not be any recourse? We ask you then as to set aside engagement and to begin to divest reasonably, responsibly, and prudently from the top 200 carbon companies over the next 5 years, and to protect our investments, keep our planet sustainable for a life for our children and grandchildren.
Thanks, Mr. Vosper. Deborah Sylvie.
Thank you, members of the Investment Committee, for allowing me to speak today. I'm Deborah Sylvie, representing Fossil Free California. Many in our statewide organization are, like me, CalSTRS members, and we're grateful not only for the pension you provide us, but also for the leadership that CalSTRS has shown in considering the impacts of climate change in your investment policy. But we believe that divesting from fossil fuels would be demonstrating an even greater leadership in protecting against environmental and financial crises. We are at a watershed moment now when our reliance on fossil fuels is increasingly questioned on several fronts. First, renewable energy is fast becoming competitive with fossil fuels. Onshore wind is already the cheapest source of energy. In the US, solar photovoltaic has dropped by 50% in the last 7 years. Other renewable costs are dropping fast too, and installations are soaring. Jobs in green energy are growing. In the coal mining state of Kentucky, there are now more jobs in renewable energy than in coal mining. Second, coal, as you know, a fossil fuel we once thought the world couldn't get along without, is in trouble, and divestment is now seen as a sound financial choice. Third, just recently, as you just heard with Mr. Steyer, 6 European large companies, including Shell and BP, have realized that they cannot ignore the reality of global warming and have said they will ask for carbon pricing. And finally, global warming has made its way into the consciousness of Americans, especially Californians. 79% of Californians believe that global warming is happening. In fact, 2 large California unions, education unions, have decided to support divestment efforts: the California Faculty Association and the California Federation of Teachers. These unions' members have a direct stake in the issue, their own pensions. So here we are with some hopeful indicators that we can move away from fossil fuels in time to avoid climate catastrophe. but we only have a brief moment. Greenhouse gas emissions are rising, temperatures are rising, more extreme weather events are occurring. We cannot afford any more delay in changing the course that we're on now. We especially can't afford to let good PR substitute for real action. For example, Shell Oil recently agreed to a shareholder resolution to become more responsible about climate risk. And yet, just last month, we learned the company plans to resume drilling in the Arctic. Shell continues to pursue its core business plan to find more oil, no matter the cost to the environment and the climate. Fossil-Free California believes that the political power of these fossil fuel companies and their power to delay needed action must and can be challenged, and that divestment is the best means for doing so. Let me quote Sir Mark Moody Stewart, former longtime chairman of Shell. Quote, "Investors moving money out of fossil fuel companies is a rational response to the industry's distressing lack of progress on climate change. We urge CalSTRS not to delay, but to take on this new kind of fiduciary responsibility. Begin a responsible 5-year plan to divest from all fossil fuels." Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Sylvie. Heather MacLeod? Heather MacLeod? Do we have? Oh.
Hello, my name is Heather MacLeod from Oakland. And I'm a member, I'm vested in STRS, so I want to thank you for the time and care you put into taking care of my savings. I appreciate that. I'm here partly representing my students in an after-school class called Polar Bears, Global Warming and You. I'm representing Avian, a 7th grade girl who does not like math, and she's kind of popular and pretty. But when she saw that graph of how the carbon levels went from 200 to 300 and 200 to 300 for the last 600,000 years, and then went up like this to 400, she gasped and she said, "Oh my God." She's never said, "Oh my God," to a graph before in her life. I'm representing Ryan, who wants to know why 1 degree matters. And as we talked it out, we thought, well, 1 degree is the difference between 32 degrees Fahrenheit, where you have a frozen ice pack that gives you water on a regular basis, and 33 degrees, where you don't have a frozen ice pack and you have a drought. This is the first time in my long teaching career where I have been worried about telling kids the truth. I've been scared that I might be scaring them too much when I tell them what's happening. I can't responsibly teach them what's happening and what the dangers are unless I can say we grown-ups are doing everything we can. We're thinking in new ways. We're imagining that maybe in 50 years no one will care if we saved $5 or $10 or $50 or $100, but that there's something more at stake. And so I'm here asking you because my integrity as a teacher is at stake. I can't teach them the truth without having another truth, which is that we are trying something new and different that we don't know how to do either. But please, let's figure it out as fast as we can because my students are scared. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Joyce Bond? I hope I'm saying your last name okay. Joyce Bond.
Hi, I'm Joyce Bond. I'm a retired teacher living in Grass Valley. I attempt to be conscious of every choice I make, that my lifestyle matches my values, and all my little other money is in socially responsible places. But of course, it gives me a heavy heart that since most of my financial resources are in CalSTRS, that some of the effects of that are so against life on the planet. So I do encourage divestment, and I'm thrilled that you allowed me to speak. Thank you.
Thank you. And our Alyssa Gianchino, from Unit here. And then, did you want to, okay. We have 2, yeah.
Alyssa Jake with Unite Here. I just want to say I really value the time and thoughtfulness with which CalSTRS is approaching these discussions. You continue to show tremendous leadership in framing environmental, social, governance issues within your approach to investment. It's important that you know that investors like CalSTRS have been instrumental in pressing asset managers to incorporate ESG as part of risk mitigation, as part of long-term value creation. For us specifically, we are witness to that in the hospitality sector, in things like labor peace agreements. I think sustainable investment must mean ensuring our communities and our planet can flourish through health, broad prosperity, and better income equality. With your unique long-term obligations, I think CalSTRS has the opportunity to contribute meaningfully to a better future for teachers, for hotel housekeepers, and for all of us through enhancing your already forward-thinking framework on sustainability. Thank you.
Maggie Ellis, CTA. Hi, Maggie.
Maggie Ellis, Chair, CTA Retirement Committee. This conversation, I have to thank the staff and the board for having this conversation and previous conversations about fossil fuel. And it's not a separate conversation from the whole sustainability dialogue that we had yesterday. That conversation came an enlightenment of we have some work to do on getting common language, common definitions. What does it mean? How do we move forward? And I don't think it's separate from what does it mean with engagement too. Our definition of sustainability and our definition of engagement and understanding how those two things are integrally a part of each other. When we look at talking about fossil fuels in the future, it's the whole fund. It's not just this one fund when we're talking about sustainability. So I don't want people to think we can just carve one out without looking at the entire fund and the impact and the future. And that's something that we've had dialogue of that at our state council. This last weekend we had a 2-hour presentation with our Peace and Justice Caucus on divestment, and our staff person for retirement spent another hour and a half having a more in-depth conversation. And from that, we all came away with a whole nother understanding of the intricacies in this conversation. And it's not just about pull your money and run. It's not just about engagement. It's how do we, as team members, affect change, have a powerful system, and truly get at what our purpose is, and that's having a secure retirement for teachers current and future. So thank you for having the dialogue. We enjoy continuing to have the engagement and discussion as we have had in the past, and I continue to think this is going to be an ongoing dialogue. But I would encourage people to listen to all of the conversations that we have about sustainability and not just one portion of it, because it's not something that you can take out of the pie. It is the whole pie. Thank you.
I think that concludes our public comment. I guess I would like to gauge the board in terms of time. It's 12:35. Do you want to break for lunch now and then resume our private equity? Okay. So, I figured as much. So let's go ahead and break for lunch, half hour. So we'll come back at 5 after 1 and finish our conversation about the private equity consultants. And I guess I would ask that Makita and PCA, we love you. Go somewhere else for a while.